need to let this go for just about another 5-10 seconds. Looks good. And we are ready. The meeting is yours, Mr. Whitcomb. Let me know if you need anything.
Okay, thank you. Call to order the Lyon Township Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for Monday, July 20th. I'm going to ask for some guidance on the Zoom Pledge of Allegiance. I'm hoping we're still doing it, but I'm deferring to someone that's done this before.
Yes.
Okay, so we will we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance together here.
I pledge
allegiance
allegiance
To
the flag
to the flag of the United States of
the
America
Republic for which
and
it
to the
stands,
republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
That was an adventure, but very cool. So we'll start with the approval of the agenda. Carol, what I don't have, and I apologize, is the verbiage that we're normally, how we roll with this committee. I don't have that in front of me.
Okay.
I can jump right into the approval. I don't know if that's required for the meeting or if
No, it's just something to explain to the residents, but I'm sure Walbridge is well aware, and we've only got one other applicant. So I think we're fine to proceed. What you have to remember, Dean, is because this is a remote meeting, we have to do roll call votes for everything, even approving the agenda.
Okay, very good.
We need a roll call to start the meeting, Mr. Vice Chair.
We need a roll call to start the meeting. Mr. Barber, are you present?
I'm present on the phone. I can hear and I can talk, and I have no video.
Miss Lisa Blades?
Yes.
Mr. Chuck?
Yes.
Dean Whitcomb is here, and I believe we are without Mr. Rainey.
I'd like to make a motion to,
Motion.
what is that called? To excuse his absence?
I'll second.
Excuse?
Okay, not really necessary, but that's
Okay.
fine if you'd like to do that.
There's been a motion to excuse Mr. Rainey, and it's been seconded. Mr. Barber, yay or nay?
Yes.
Miss Blades?
Yes.
Mr. Chuck?
Yes.
And I am also a yes. So Mr. Rainey is excused. Next item would be approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve as submitted.
I'll second. Mike Barber.
I have a question. Would we consider moving the resident earlier in the agenda item? Since it might be a shorter discussion? I don't know if there's an interest in that.
I'm not opposed. It's I think they're both going to be fairly smooth. So
Okay, I don't know what would be what the
If you
probably
want
the
to
other-
amend, if you want to amend the agenda to move that item up, make a motion to amend the agenda to change the order of the two items.
is our resident applicant available, or is she still at the air fryer?
Actually, it looks like she is no longer online at this point.
So
Okay,
then I will
well,
not
just-
make a motion.
All right,
Okay.
so we're just gonna call the roll on the original motion then.
okay, there was a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Mr. Barber?
Yes.
Miss Blades?
Yes.
Mr. Chuck?
Yes.
And Dean Whitcomb is a yes also. That takes us to the approval of the draft minutes from the January 21st meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the draft minutes or to approve the minutes from January 21, 2020.
Support.
Motion by Blades, supported by Chuck. Any comments, concerns? Mr. Barber, yay or nay?
Yes.
Ms. Blades?
Yes.
Mr. Chuck?
Yes.
And I am also a yes. The minutes from January 21st are approved. That takes us to public hearing number 1. Walbridge, with an address 777 Woodward Ave, Suite 300, Detroit, Michigan. The Sidwell number in play is 21-03-451-003. and 21-03-451-002. This is for portions of both of those. Property is located on the southwest corner of Grand River Avenue and South Hill Road. The applicant requests a variance from section 36.02 of the zoning ordinance, which allows a maximum building height of 45 feet in the I-2 General Industrial District. This applicant is requesting a maximum building height of 52 feet. Therefore, a variance of 7 feet is being requested. And I'm assuming you want to hear from McKenna at this point. Would that be appropriate, Carol?
Yes.
Okay. Brian, it's all yours, sir.
Thank you, Dean. You'll see up on my screen, I have the elevation drawings of the proposed building. And I'd like to note that this project has been through the Planning Commission and the Township Board for site plan and special land use approval. So there were public hearings held. There was a public hearing held by the Planning Commission and a conditional approval on the site plan. And then when the Township Board reviewed the special land use, they approved the special land use contingent on receipt of this variance or granting of this variance. So I would like to reference my letter dated July 17th of this year, talking about how the project or the proposal addresses the 5 standards of our zoning ordinance relating to non-use variances. I'll just run through those quickly, but I do want to note that I understand the applicants have amended the plans slightly to address some of the concerns in our letter. So I know they intend to present that to you this evening. One of the things that we always have challenged our applicants to do is find a way to minimize the request to the extent feasible. I think they've taken a good attempt at doing that. So we'll hear them, but please note that that the comments here are related to the plans that you've had a chance to review. In terms of strict compliance with the dimensional standards relating to the property, this is a vacant piece of land right now, and so it's a blank slate for somebody to come in and develop the property for industrial uses. It is an I-2, our heaviest industrial district. And so one of the things that is part of the application is the description of the required minimum clear height inside the structure that the applicants are requesting, which is 36 feet. And we understand that by the time you add trusses to that, you add insulation for the roof, so on and so forth, the height of the structure quickly increases up to the 46-foot minimum. And then if you can follow my cursor here, these parapet walls at strategic locations around the outside of the building are where the height is increased up to a maximum of 52 feet at the northeast corner of the structure. We don't find that meeting the 45-foot height requirement is unnecessarily burdensome for this site. Many other industrial users have complied with that height. And so we think it's feasible, or it has been demonstrated as feasible on other properties. In terms of substantial justice to the applicant and to other property owners, I mentioned that others have been able to achieve this standard. I will say that this is a standard I think that may be a bit of a moving target as users start filling more modern structures, uses change, efficiencies change, and so one of the recurring themes that I'm going to talk about on this is that if we find that this is an appropriate modification to the height standards, it may be something that we look for a recommendation to the Planning Commission to study whether our 45-foot height limit is reasonable in today's development. In terms of a lesser variance, being consistent with justice to property owners, to my knowledge, looking back at previous variances, previous requests, all industrial users have been able to meet our 45-foot height limitation. And so we understand that minimizing the height of this structure is feasible, it is possible. Understanding that this is one of the things that we've talked about at all the boards, is that the building has received a lot of positive aesthetic comments for how it looks, especially relating to the size of this structure. And I want to mimic those. I think it's a good looking industrial structure and have no concerns there. I do just think that the parapet walls, they exceed that 45-foot height limitation for an aesthetic purpose. And in this instance, they do serve somewhat of a functional component as well, in that the HVAC is anticipated to be behind those parapet walls. Finally, the problem and resulting need for the variance must be judged not self-created by the applicant or predecessors. I mentioned at the onset that this is a blank slate, so some of these standards should be pretty easy to hit, and it is feasible, it's feasible, but it may be at the detriment to some aesthetic and functional concerns in our estimation. So you see our recommendation in that letter, which would be that we don't find that it meets all of the standards. I'd encourage you to listen to the applicants tonight and how they are addressing some of those concerns, and see if the request is reasonable based on what they present to you. With that, I can take any questions, hear any concerns you have for me.
Not at this time, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. We may be back to you here. I think it's probably appropriate to hear from the applicant at this point. Who do we have on behalf of the applicant?
Good evening. My name is John Ackerman with Atwell, 2 Town Square, Southfield, Michigan, 48076, in case you need the address. And with me this evening is Guy Toro with Carlson Architects, the chief architect involved in the project, and Adorno Piccinini with Wallbridge, the owner of the development. If I may, I'm going to share my screen. That's possible.
Just go on in. Just go in. She's in there.
Well, we haven't been going in people's houses yet.
Knock on the door.
Does everybody see this elevation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I do
what
not.
you see-
I don't see
do
anything.
No.
How could Mike see
Oh.
it?
Yeah,
I can't see it either.
I got a screen of the blueprints of the side views, is front view and of the building on my screen. I just can't see people's faces. Whoop, I lost it just now.
someone's email is up.
Yes.
It's you, John.
Yep. I had this set up before. All right, hold on 1 second. I got to figure out which screen I need to share here. Okay.
Okay.
we go.
Seeing,
I can see
there
it.
we go. Sorry about that.
We got
Too
our
many monitors going. Okay, so what you're seeing here is an aerial view of the proposed development site. As everyone's aware, this is South Hill Road and this is Grand River Avenue. So we're looking south from, towards the development site. The building
Yes.
itself will, the majority of the frontage of this building will front on South Hill. And the intent of this building is actually a spec building. So there'll be up to 4 separate tenants in this building. So a majority of the frontages and the front entrances will be along this elevation fronting on South Hill. So this is actually, we're looking south, so this will be the eastern elevation of the building itself. Scrolling down. So what we're looking at here, this is the elevation that you're looking at from Grand River. So this is the north elevation looking south. And then these two splits right here are going to be your elevation looking along South Hill Boulevard or South Hill Road, looking at the building itself. Now, the key to this is when you know, a standard industrial building, sometimes the wayfinding is a little difficult. And Carlson did a good job of creating these larger parapets that identify the primary locations for entrance into the building. So there'd be one entrance on the north side of the building, and then 3 separate entrances on the east side of the building coming into the site. These lower parapets right here are placed strategically to kind of break up the massing of the building going across the site. This is a significant sized building. So when we had discussions initially with the client and with the architect, there, as Brian kind of alluded to, the industry trends are trending towards taller, larger, free span space on the internal or in the internal layout of a building. Right now, the goal is 36 feet, so 36 feet of clear storage rack height within the building itself. Once you add in the trusses, the roof pans, flashing, everything else on top, you're starting to really push up against that 45-foot limit, including the fact that these building roofs aren't flat. They're actually sloped in order to encourage drainage to cross drain across the buildings themselves. And when you start looking at a building of this size, that slope will add a couple of feet to the building height itself. So what we had originally proposed was a clear interior span of 36 feet, the low edge of the roof at 49. And by the time you got to this point right here, you're at 46 feet. Now, I will tell you that a majority of the site, over 75% of the perimeter of the building, is what you see right here, here, all along here. These end caps, the taller parapets, come in at just about 14% of the perimeter of the building, and then the lower parapets come in at just about 10% of the building. Excuse me, I reversed that. These are 10, these are 14. So when it's all said and done, 75% of the building does meet that, or was that proposed to be 46 feet. When we received Brian's letter on Friday, we started to have some conversations about, okay, are there outside the box design parameters that can come into play to try and get at least this portion of these gray areas down to 45 feet so that they would come into compliance with the township ordinance? And the answer is yes. It's, Adorno's not happy about it because, there's extra money involved in this, but there's alternate grading criteria and draining techniques that can be used on the roof that can lower it down a little bit, internalize the drains and everything else to make this work. So what we have done is, scroll one actually, here. So what we've done is we were able to lower everything by 1 foot. So what you see right here, the current design that we have shows.
John, that's still part of the same presentation. You should have one more slide.
Pardon me? Yep, no, you're right, it's down, so we'll get to it. So right now, what we're showing, what we have proposed to you is a 52-foot max height with most of the building being at 46 feet. If we scroll down here, what we're willing, based on some alternate design options that we can do through value engineering, we can get this portion of the building down to 45 feet, which then becomes compliant with the height requirements. This parapet section would then be 49 feet, and this parapet section, the tallest, would then come down to 51 feet, as you can see right here. So
that last portion, we didn't see the plans change. The old plans are still showing to the group.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you, Brian.
sorry. Crap. Okay. Are we looking at 51? Did you see 51 there now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So apologies for that. So like I was saying, this elevation right here is what's currently in the packet that was submitted to you. Showing 46 feet right here, 50 feet right here, 52 feet right here for the taller of the parapets. But after looking at some value engineering opportunities for us, what we can do is bring everything on the top of this building down a foot. So now the majority of the building, 75% of the building perimeter will be at 45-foot elevation, meeting zoning ordinance requirements. The medium-sized parapet will be at 49 feet. And then the end parapets, the tallest portion, will be at this 51 foot. This still will enable us to meet the 36-foot clearance on the inside. As I mentioned, it's going to be a little bit more expensive of a building, but it gets us where we need to be to try and come to a happy medium with everybody.
And I might add to that, the added height preserves the architectural character, right? As everyone has looked at this building in the different submittals and responded to it, it's because we've been able to break up the overall mass of the building, create focal points. And while we can keep our 36 clear and bring that parapet down to provide those other benefits to the building, it requires more height. And so we're asking for the tower elements to be able to exceed the 45.
So Adorno, I don't know if you want to mention anything, but that's basically where we stand right now, and we're here to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you. No, I mean, you guys did a great job, and we worked with Brian this afternoon and worked on trying to get closer to the letter that he had, minimizing the impact by lowering it about a foot. Made comment, I mean, this project's been supported. We appreciate the township administration, planning commission, the township board going through the special land use. Have all been very positive with this building. And know that we build for top 100 firms in the country, the Amazons of the world and Microsoft, and volume is the big national trend. And their volume is 40 to 60 feet minimums now. Knowing that there's a lot of things in Metro Detroit that are around the 30, 32 foot, we felt it advantageous to this site, being a new site, kicking off the overall development, that we set the pace out here to be a go-to. We want Lyon Township to become the go-to place, halfway between Detroit and Lansing. Freeway, I mean, it's a great place to do business. So we want to make sure that we are building as advanced of a building as we can for the future. Also, I don't know if John brought this up, the site does fall topography wise about 8 feet from Grand River. So though the building the height is still the height, but from a perspective standpoint, I think it gives the proper perspective on height, especially from the Grand River side. Keeping in mind, across the street from us, Ferguson, I have no idea how tall they are, but they're above 50 feet and they're up on a hill. So that's it. Unless you guys have any questions for us.
This is Mike Barber. Can I make a statement?
Go ahead, Mike.
I like the building. I mean, 51 feet and with a slope on the property of down to 8 feet. Looking at the 51 feet, I have no problem with that. They may get a tenant in there that needs high bay, like a high bay crane, and we want to discourage a tenant because it's not tall enough for them to go in and locate a business. And so I'd be inclined to vote for this.
Mr. Chairman, Jim Chuck.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I initially saw this on the Planning Commission, and I cited the 52 foot, but then I understood the reasonings behind it. Aesthetic value still brings something. I mean, I don't want it to look like an airplane hangar. Now, having said that, I applaud the applicant for going back in with the help of you, Brian, and trying to modify it, bring it a little more into conformity to our ordinance. But Brian, I think you said a mouthful when you started. I think this is something we have to look at. Since I've been on this zoning board of appeals, I know we've had 2, maybe 3, where I think times are changing. So I know it's for another day, another discussion. We probably have to look at our ordinance, but I agree with Mike. This is a welcome addition to our community, and I can certainly live with, I guess it would be 6 additional feet. I understand why it's a better looking building versus just 45 feet straight across. So I will also support this.
Dean,
Yes.
I think if anybody doesn't have any specific questions of the applicant, this would probably be a good time just to open the public hearing.
Okay, I actually do have a specific question before we do that.
Okay.
Just so I'm clear on the numbers, guys. The 11th hour changes took the overall, the main part of the building height to 45, the taller parapets to 50, and the lower parapets to 49, correct?
It is
Um,
49 and 51.
yeah, so it's
51 is-
45, 49, 51,
And what was originally submitted?
46, 50, and 52. So everything dropped by 1 foot.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
At this point, I would
I-
like, go ahead. Lisa,
I have a
let me-
question.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
So I guess my question too is, this is intended to be a spec building. Is the anticipation that every building within this project would mimic exactly these same dimensions?
Adorno, I think
Yeah.
the short answer is no.
The answer is probably no for
Okay.
site or the industrial park. We do own the other 400 acres back there, so we still have a vision of a big user of some type.
So I guess that's what I just wanted to get clear, is that this is being the spec building. It is not your intent to build these identical buildings with these request for variances for every additional building on that site. Would that be correct? Or it could or could not be, but that's not your.
Right. At this time, I couldn't answer that honestly for you. I mean, I don't know,
Okay.
Okay.
And
Go
I
ahead,
had
Lisa.
another question. If you mentioned the internal height and clearance is 36 feet. So if you were to not get this variance, would you eliminate the parapets and keep the 36 feet, or would you reduce the entire project so that the internal height is less than 36?
Adorno, let me start with that one. I think for us to reduce the 36 would be designing for planned obsolescence, right? We know
Okay.
the trends are going, this building's another year out. To put it in the market at that point, the trend will become commonplace. I don't think it's a good practice.
Okay.
And eliminating the parapets is going to make it kind of unattractive too, because now you're going to see more of the roof and everything else.
Right. I just wanted to know if you were not to get the variance, which would you go toward? Would you go toward reducing the overall height? And it seems that you would likely eliminate the parapets as opposed to reducing the internal height.
Probably.
Okay. And when you say trends, what are these trends that tend to be going that way? Just industrially, that's what new buildings are coming in at, or?
Yeah, I mean, distribution centers, manufacturing centers, crane heights, storage racking systems that are volume is more efficient for them to use than square footage and spreading it out. I'm flying out to Ogden, Utah tomorrow morning, early on a building that just came to us. They need it fast, and that thing's at 45 foot tall underneath the truss. So,
And then, I'm sorry, Dean, but I do have one more question.
No,
for
go
the
ahead, Lisa.
applicant. So I guess another question would be, is your goal to go up as opposed to spread out? Like, would you ever have this building drop it in height and then just spread it all out and have a larger footprint?
no.
And
that would be obsolescence. I mean, you know, you'd seen those buildings 50 years ago that were built like that.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions so far.
Okay, great. Carol, I'm going to open the public hearing portion. I'm assuming that I'll close that and then we'll have additional conversation amongst the board members. Would that be the correct flow here?
Correct.
Okay, I would like to open the public hearing on this at 7:30 for opportunity for the public to comment or any questions.
Mr. Whitcomb, there appears to be no public online at this moment.
Thank you. Hearing that, I will close the public hearing at 7:31 and open this back up to the board for further discussion. I think we've heard from Mr. Barber and Mr. Chuck. Did you guys have anything to add? I've got a few things, but I wanted to give you guys a chance if you had anything else to add.
Nothing else, Dean.
Okay. Lisa?
I was, I had a chance to review this building at the board meeting, and I think the building is incredibly attractive. I think it's really important for our industrial Grand River corridor. And I'll be honest, when I first saw this, I thought, oh my gosh, they're asking for higher. But I think understanding the market trends and the desire to hide your HVAC, and then I think significantly that you're creating this spec building that is really trying to change the overall look of that particular corridor is definitely a value. And I think that you have demonstrated that you've made an effort by lowering everything by 1 foot, although 1 foot may not seem like a big deal. I think that the fact that you have put forth that effort in changing very quickly based on your conversations with Brian today and your willingness to change that, even though it does increase your expense, I think that shows a genuine interest in being. And overall, I think this property is pretty unique because it's the corner parcel. It's setting the standards for this very large industrial usage. And I would not like just a box. And so I definitely feel like the value is in those parapets, and the value is in the attractiveness of the building. And I don't want to drive down Grand River every day just looking at a box with no change to the elevation. So despite my initial thought of like, no way could I support this, I actually really do support this because it brings a significant value to our community.
Okay, thank you. Brian, based on the effort and the 11th hour revisions, how does this change the tone of McKenna's letter to the board in terms of recommending or not recommending?
For me, it's a change from a required variance of 100% of the footprint of the building down to, as John mentioned, a very small piece of, or very small amounts of the facade. The standards of the ordinance that you go by for granting a variance are whether or not the ordinance can be reasonably applied to this. Some of the things that I still don't believe that the self-created issue is one that can be achieved on a virgin site like this. But I'm hearing you guys note a lot of things that are site specific, that are important. Adorno hit on the fact that it drops from the road. So there is a lot of reason to consider this. I don't think all of the standards can be achieved, but I think they've done a good job demonstrating how they've amended the plan to request the smallest variance that's feasible on something like this. That's a roundabout way of answering that question, Dean, but I don't have a straight answer for you. We talked about it this afternoon, but it's still a first shot at looking at it. So,
yeah, and I guess if I can add, the standards are not black and white. You have to apply your discretion and consider all the factors when you're deciding them, even with respect to the self-created. I mean, there has been some evidence presented to you tonight that there has been a change in the industry. and that maybe our ordinances have not yet caught up with those changes. And so, you know, that might support some finding that it's not necessarily self-created. And I think it is a good idea. Everybody's talked about it, and then started with Brian. I think it's a good idea that we probably look at this issue overall moving forward. But again, just, you know, listen to everything you've heard and apply your discretion and, you know, determine whether or not you think those factors have been met.
Well, I think that's a great point. I personally, I feel the same way. I don't like the spot that we're put in as a board with this, because it does seem to run counter to several of our tenants, our marching orders, but that's why we're here too, is to apply discretion and common sense. And I'm not frustrated by the township with this or the applicant. It's just, it's the status of things. And one of my notes early on in the call was, can we put the cart before the horse and approve the variance and then kick it back to the township, you know, with a request to review for future. I came into the similar Lisa that it was hitting a no on so many of our tenants of how we operate, but I see the effort. I love the aesthetics versus not, that I would agree with my other board members that although it runs counter to our marching orders per se, it really makes sense in this case. I would apply discretion as well and would be in support of this as well.
I think Dean hit on something that I agree with. You know, we had one case where it was the north of 96, where it was that storage or repair facility for the large equipment. And we granted that variance because the machinery was changing. And it's not created by the applicant, the machinery was changing. And I feel like they've made a pretty good argument with some data specific information about the obsolescence, and that the trends of distribution are changing, the crane heights. So those are within, I don't think that those items are self-created. I think I feel more comfortable hearing that kind of background. And like I said, it reminds me of that one case that we had on I forgot the name of the company, but it was north of 96. And then so where Dean had mentioned about going back and addressing a change perhaps to, you know, suggesting perhaps that the planning commission look at this ordinance when we had the issue with the playgrounds for care center, that it seemed, you know, so much larger than was required. And then we sent that back to the planning commission, and then that ordinance was in fact changed. So I think that this gives us a good opportunity to maybe send this back, you know, perhaps suggest to the planning commission to, you know, maybe create an overlay district, maybe for the corridor there, or, you know, just taking a closer look at that. But as Dean mentioned, I don't necessarily mind saying yes to this variance in hopes that the ordinance does end up changing to accommodate those, the changing trend.
You said that was the exact building I was referring to earlier, the one you mentioned north of 96. So I would agree with you. Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion if you're ready for one.
Fire away, Mr. Chuck.
Well, I guess I'll make a motion that we send this forward, granting the variance as proposed in the revised plans. The applicants provided, as well as the letter from McKenna dated, did you say July 9th, Brian?
17th.
I'm sorry, 17th. I don't know what else I need to add, because I don't see an applicant number, but do I need the Sidwell numbers? Does anyone know?
They're right on the agenda, Mike, Jim.
Oh, so I need to include the Sidwell numbers in my motion?
You can if you want. I'm a little, and I hate to stop you in the middle, but I'm a little confused by your motion because you referred to McKenna's letter.
Well,
And
okay.
McKenna's letter recommends denial.
You're right, Carol. So I would just make a motion this be moved forward with the requested variances by the applicant.
Should we do the height then, the 45 feet for the building, 49 feet for the low parapet, and 51 feet for the high parapet?
Well, that was that's what they presented in the revised plan, but I'm okay with putting that in there, Lisa. Yeah,
Right. I mean, because it's not anywhere in writing for our record.
That's fine. Kelly, did you get that?
I
51?
have it.
Okay, I'm fine. Thank you on that.
Carol, any other guidance there on that motion?
Can you articulate what the practical difficulties are? I mean, I think listening to the various comments made by the board members, they gave reasons why. this
Because
would be
it
practical
has aesthetic
difficult.
value. It's aesthetically pleasing. It does bring value to the township as it relates to developing that industrial corridor. I don't know what else I could add to it.
Should the
The
8-foot
sloping
slope,
land.
that the 8-foot slope would be a practical difficulty that is based on the land?
That's correct.
And it's not necessarily
the-
self-created due to the changing economic conditions of this type of building.
And that's correct.
Like that too?
Okay, so are you making all those part of your original motion?
I certainly am.
Okay,
We have a motion.
I'll support.
I'll second.
We have a support from Ms. Blades. Let's
and
take a
roll
vote.
call?
Mr. Barber,
I say yes.
Ms. Blades,
Yes.
Mr. Chuck.
Yes.
I am also a yes. Motion carries. Variance is approved.
Might have
Great.
been the largest motion ever that I,
You herded those cats though. Good
that's
job.
okay.
Good
That's
job.
okay.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
Everybody,
Thank you,
Two.
guys.
Thank you.
off to the
Thank you.
races.
Brian, at this time, can we perhaps suggest maybe that we direct you to suggest to the planning commission, perhaps a review of these zoning standards and modifications? And I'm sure that April and Talaga and Michelle Cash would probably appreciate that happening sometime after August.
We actually have a list of some other ones too, right, Brian?
The big list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we will put that on the list.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, we're on to our next item. Applicant's name is Carrie, is it Castle? Are they on with us?
They're showing, but they're muted.
Bringing them up right now, Mr.
Okay.
Webb.
Hi, is the last name Castle?
Yes, Castle, yes.
Hi. Thank you. So this variance is Carrie Castle, 29525 Pine Tree Drive in New Hudson, Sidwell number 21-05-041-025. The applicant requests a variance from section 18.03A1 of the zoning ordinance, which states that accessory structures may not be located closer to the front property line than the principal building or structure on parcels that are a minimum size of 2 acres. The applicant would like to construct a garage that would be closer to the front line than the existing house on a parcel measuring 1.41 acres. Therefore, a variance from the 2 acre minimum size requirement is being requested. The front yard setback of 75 feet as required in the R1 residential agriculture district would still be met. So just to be clear, we're looking for a variance to apply this to a parcel smaller than 2 acres and apply the 2 acre minimum size requirements, correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Bryan, fire away, sir.
Thank you, Dean. I'm showing the property on the screen, and we are looking at a property just west of Martindale on Pontiac Trail. And so you can see the proposed location of this structure. The reason that it does not comply with the ordinance is that the main home is not 75 feet setback from Pontiac Trail. So technically, per our ordinance, on a piece of land less than 2 acres, this structure should be essentially anywhere within the fenced-in area of the yard. Had the property been greater than 2 acres, this location is not a problem and would be approved today. And as you pointed out, Dean, the setback from Pontiac Trail is 75 feet. So had the main residence been located just farther south, this proposed structure would comply with the ordinance. In your packet, you've got several pieces of information to consider, and one of the key things in our review is the presence of flooding in the rear yard on this property. We've hit on it over and over again in our review, but you know, the visual evidence is pretty compelling that if you were to build a structure in this rear yard, you would really have to bump up the grade to get a foundation or a level, a finished floor level that's going to be outside of the water level. And so that's something that we're going to keep hitting on. You know, strict compliance with the restrictions governing the area and the setback for the structure. When the rear yard is largely flooding, let's see, on the second page here shows a bit of the flood area as well as depicted. That's a pretty substantial area, and really the structure makes sense to us in terms of getting it out of the flood zone. And so when you think about the things that make this unnecessarily burdensome, we've got to build up the grade significantly, potentially just kicking the can down the road to another property owner in terms of where the flood is going to occur when that happens. We see this throughout the township, more and more requests about water and flooding issues and properties underwater, especially in the spring. So anything that we can do to minimize the amount of additional fill where we're flooding is something that we are typically going to support. The variance, the second standard being that this will do substantial justice to the applicant as well as other property owners. Again, we want to take into consideration on a site-by-site basis where things are going and the potential impact that they have. In this instance, we think it's fair for the property owner to develop the structure outside of their flooding area. We also don't think it causes any impacts to the justice that any other property owner would have. If this property were developed from scratch today, somebody could build their main residence up to 75 feet from the property line. This location really doesn't increase impact beyond what we would expect to see on any property in the R10 district. A lesser variance would not give substantial relief. If you look at the proposed location, sorry, I've got children running around. I hope they're not too loud. The location of the proposed structure is pushed back about as far as the applicants are comfortable with in terms of the location and keeping out of that flood zone. So we don't believe that a lesser variance would help out in this instance. We mentioned unique circumstances on the property are the flooding and the location of the boundary of that flood zone. So we find that this standard has been met. And then it is not a self-created issue in this case. We mentioned this is happening on specific properties throughout the township, be it changing flood patterns or just the increase in development and the suitability of the drains in the township. We do hear these requests more and more. So based on those standards, we think this is a reasonable request. We find that that our ordinance does place a bit of a burden and that the resultant fix for the location that's compliant is going to cause, or has the potential at least to cause, more issues on adjacent or nearby properties. So for those reasons, we would recommend approval of this variance.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian, or we hear from the applicant at this time?
Yes, it's, I'm Kerry Castle, 29525 Pine Tree Drive. And after looking at every possible option, there was just no other place to put it on this property because of the flooding. And if we move it farther, we can't move it farther north because of a septic field, We're far away from the septic field. And if we move it farther back, then we're moving it into the floodplain. So this was our only reasonable place to put it. It does not obstruct views or anything for road-wise. It's far enough back from the house and the garage where you're not going to really see it. And it is going to match the house. You know, vinyl siding. It's not a pole building. It's a stick-built garage. And just be for car storage.
Okay, do we have any questions, specific questions for the applicant?
Mike Barber has a question.
Go ahead, Mike.
Is that a garage that the cars are parked in front of at the edge of your driveway? Is that a garage you already have?
Yes, that is a garage.
Why do we need a second one?
Because I have snowmobiles, four-wheelers, car trailer. Right, and we have five kids, and there's a lot going on, and we don't want the stuff sitting in the yard.
Yeah, we don't want it hanging out around the yard looking like that.
Okay, that's my question.
Brian, I have a question for you. I don't know if this is the right time. How much storage is allowed on this parcel?
Why don't you ask again, Lisa? We had a little disruption there.
Brian, how much storage is allowed on this parcel by percentages, by rights?
Let me run the math on that real quick and I will get right back to you.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing up on this. Public hearing is open on this case at 7:52. Mr. Milburn, any public online that would like to comment or any questions?
There are no public online at this moment, Mr. Wickel.
Okay. Hearing none, we will close the public hearing at 7:52. I'll jump in here. I would tend to support this variance for all the reasons laid out in the McKenna letter, and I won't beat a dead horse by going back over them. I would just add that I actually know Stan. I don't know if Stan remembers me, but I ran Astro and Allied for years, Stan. I'm no longer employed there, so I don't have a conflict. You're muted, actually, but I know that the quality of work they're going to get is going to be outstanding. So I have no concerns about the aesthetics of what they're going to have there. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
absolutely.
To answer Lisa's question, I'm sorry,
Yes.
Lisa. 1,260 square feet. So this structure is they could have up to 1,260 square feet. And as proposed, this is about 860, give or take.
Okay. Dean, I just wanted to comment, the thing that stands out to me the most in this particular applicant's situation is that this is definitely a very true, unique circumstance of this particular parcel. He mentioned the septic field, but more significantly is the flooding that takes place there. And as I'm sure many of us do remember, the car accident that happened so many years ago was right around that area, that flooding. It's just if we were to have them regrade to meet our variance, or I'm sorry, to meet our standard, and that were to in any way change the patterns of flooding, it would just be, in my mind, it would be another tragedy. And so I think that that's a significant item to consider. I'm not sure if everybody on the ZBA remembers that accident a few years ago, but the Montanez family lost the father and one child because of flooding across that section of the road. That is definitely, my son was friends with that family. So, I mean, it's when I saw this circumstance, looked at that flooding, I think it's a really big thing to consider, is that we don't want to have changing in our flooding patterns. But then, just looking at other items too, you know, this parcel has 1,200 or 1,260 feet allowable storage, and they're asking for 860 square feet of storage. Regrade just to put this this item there, I think it's an unfair request, and or it would be unfair to them, and strict compliance would really become unnecessarily burdensome. And those conclude my comments.
Mr. Chuck, anything?
Nothing that hasn't already been said. However, I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Mr. Barber?
I'll be supporting it too. You know, I'm thinking it won't affect the flooding, or it won't squish the water out onto the road. I'm hoping, because they're going to build it in a dry area, and there'll be a footing in there. And you know, I understand, but you have a lot of kids, you have a lot of toys, and there's, you know, and it's part of life. And I would be voting for it.
Carrie, just a quick question for you. I see as part of the supporting documentation, letters of support from your direct neighbors. And there was a late arrival of multiple neighbors that aren't direct neighbors as opposed to this. I wondered if you might touch on that, and what your thoughts are there. Why would they be opposed?
Yeah.
I don't really know, because it's not in their line of view. Everybody that I know that are landlocked owners with me have no problem with it. Actually, most of them have, most everybody on our street has second garages or pole barns. So this was, I don't understand why somebody would, because it's not messing. I could see if it was messing with line of sight, but it's not. It's far enough set back. You know, and if
there was a reference to
nobody on
working
our
vehicles.
street that I know of.
There was a reference to working on vehicles and potential noise. Has that been an issue in the past?
Well, I have a toy car, but the Oakland County Sheriff's has said that it's no louder than a Harley.
Perfect.
So,
And Stan, I try to get out to these sites before, and I didn't on this one. Do you see any issues matching the claddings and whatnot to what's existing? You gonna have any issues there? You're muted, Stan.
No, sir. No, we're going to put vinyl siding on it. We're going to put dimensional shingles on it to match the house. Like you said, it's not a pole barn, so it'll look like a nice second garage.
That's all I had.
Dean, if we were
Can I
willing to have a motion,
Lisa, why don't you go ahead first, then we'll go to Mike.
I would just, if we were entertaining a motion, I would like to make a motion to approve this variance per the McKenna letter, specifically calling out the strict compliance is unnecessarily burdensome, the unique circumstances of the parcel with flooding and his septic field, and this is not self-created.
I will support that motion.
We have a motion and a support.
Discussion? Can I get a
Yes, discussion. Mr. Barber?
Yeah, can we add something in there about him not working, like an automobile repair shop, like a backyard mechanic? Late at night, we have noise ordinances that should be obeyed. And if we start to get complaints, what can we do, you know, after it's already built? You know, what kind of thing happens?
Carol, go ahead.
Would be on their own ordinance violations if they took place, and that would be the best way to handle them, would be through an issuance. It's kind of difficult to, you know, include in a motion everything that somebody shouldn't do.
Okay.
You know, so if in fact there is a problem, you know, and the township is notified, we'll issue tickets if there are violations.
Okay.
I'll keep my motion as is.
Okay, we have a motion from Ms. Blades, support by Mr. Chuck. Any further discussion? Okay, Mr. Barber, what say you?
I agree to go ahead and build it. Enjoy your life.
Ms.
Yes.
Blades?
Yes.
Mr. Chuck?
Yes.
Okay, I'm also a yes. The variance has been approved.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Do we log off then now? Or?
No, we have election of officers.
Oh,
The applicant
It was
can
supposed to
log off
take
if you
place
like.
in January.
Yes.
The applicant can.
Applicants, you're welcome to stay, but you can log off yourself. So
oh, Okay,
So our next item is election of officers. This generally happens in January. We didn't have a full staff then, and we haven't had any meetings, so we're going to tackle that now. Carol, anything to add here, or what the process should be?
Nope, just somebody needs to make a motion to, nominate the chair and vice chair.
So I'm going to jump in first here and start the conversation. I very much enjoy this group. I think that the cadence is good. There's good communication between the group, and I would support keeping things as they were in 2019 in terms of Mr. Rainey being the chair, myself being the vice chair. But that's
a
one man's
motion.
opinion.
I
Does
agree.
somebody want to make a motion up to that effect?
Who's the secretary? Is that Jim Chuck?
I don't think we have one, Mike.
Kelly's the secretary.
I will make
Kelly, all
a
right.
motion.
Okay.
I will make a motion. We retain Mr. Rainey as chairperson and Brian, not Brian, I'm sorry, my bad, Dean. Mr. Whitcomb as vice chair. And I
I'll
agree with
second.
you. Communication is great, and I think it's a good group.
We have a motion, a second from Mr. Barber. Lisa, any comment there? Any discussion?
Do we have a secretary?
Kelly,
Kelly,
Yes. Well, yes, I know we have a secretary. I thought there was a third.
well, but the way the bylaws are set up, Kelly, you appoint a secretary or like a designee. Kelly actually acts as the secretary for the ZBA.
Okay.
Okay, so there's been a motion by Mr. Chuck, support from Mr. Barber to retain the structure as it was in 2019. Mr. Barber, what say you?
I agree. Yes.
Blades?
Yes.
Mr. Chuck?
yes.
And I'm also a yes. Motion carries. Having said and done that, I think a motion to adjourn is probably in order, isn't it, Carol?
Yes, or you can just adjourn
Motion
it as
to
the chair.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and take the hammer. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. And
Nice
great
job,
job
everyone.
for a first Zoom call for several people. Great job.
Yeah, nice job.
Yeah.
Excellent work.
Good night,
everyone.
Thank you,
everybody.
Dean. Good job.
Good night.
Good night.
Everybody.
Nice
Bye,
job,
Lisa.
Dean.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Feel free to log off. I just have to let this wind down.